This lesson is on section 2.1, titled Integers and Absolute Value. So a couple of vocabulary words that I want you to know going into this lesson is that the word integers is a term that means negative or positive whole numbers. So for example, -1 is an integer, or the number 1 is an integer. -2 is an integer, or +8 is an integer. Again, it's any negative or positive whole number. So, for example, -8.5 or 8.5 is not an integer because it's a decimal. The next vocabulary word I want you to understand is that the term absolute value means the distance the number is from 0 on a number line. And you can see that these two bars right here are ways, is actually the sign for absolute value. So you put two bars next to a number. And I want you to realize that absolute value always is a positive number. So for example, if I were to say this would be the sign for the absolute value of 3. Notice I just put two lines next to the number 3. And in the examples that I'm going to show, you're going to understand how to solve for absolute value or the distance away from 0. So my first example, it says write an integer. So again, think of integer as a negative or positive whole number. So write an integer that represents 160 feet below 0. Okay, so because this is a number or a sentence here, I'm going to underline what's the most important terms in the sentence. So first I need to write an integer, so that's a negative or positive whole number, and I need to represent the number 160 feet, and I'm really want to highlight the word below sea level. Now, the term below is going to tell us that it's a negative number. For example, so if below is negative, then above would be positive. So below 0, so I would write negative 160 feet. So we can represent 160 feet below sea level as negative 160 feet. My next example is to evaluate, and notice how I have the absolute value signs. So I said evaluate the absolute value of, that's how you read this statement, evaluate the absolute value of -2. So now I have to think back. Okay, absolute value means the distance the number is away from 0, and I always know that my answer is going to be positive. Okay, so I'm going to locate -2 on my number line, and then I'm going to say, okay, how far is -2 away from 0? It's 1, 2. Oh, okay, it's only 2 away from 0. So the absolute value of -2 is just 2. On to my next example. I said, write an integer to represent a gain of 15 pounds. Okay, so I want to underline my important terms of the sentence. Gain 15 pounds. All right, so gain, I know you're adding onto a weight. Okay, so that's a positive value. So I would say, okay, well, I'm gaining, so that's positive 15 pounds. Or I can just write that as 15 pounds because that positive sign, okay, right here is not necessary. So I can just write the integer as, just kind of rewrite it as itself, 15 pounds, or you're welcome to put this plus sign in front, whatever works for you. My last example is to evaluate the absolute value of 8. Again, that's how you read that. Evaluate the absolute value of 8. Okay, so again, I have to realize, okay, absolute value means the distance away from 0. So I'm going to locate the number 8 on the number line, and I'm going to say, okay, well, how far is it away from 0? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It is 8 away from 0. So the absolute value of -8 equals +8. And that brings me to the end of the lesson on integers and absolute value.